This is my strawberry bed. To be honest, it's been a bit of a disappointment, but I've learned a lot through this process, and I'm going to share some of that with you. One of my biggest problems is that things keep eating my strawberries. Chipmunks, voles, deer, even birds come in and help themselves. It's not a big bed, and by the time they're all finished, there's nothing left for me. So that's not really working for me. So what I'm going to do in this video is show you how to build a new enclosed system for your strawberries so that none of those rodents will eat them. They'll keep out the birds. They'll even keep out the deer. I'm going to split this video into sort of 3 parts. In the first part, I'm going to give you the history of this bed. That's important so you understand what the potential problems are and the reason for building the bed the way I'm going to build it. We'll also learn some lessons along the way about growing strawberries. In the second part of the video, I'm going to do a fairly quick segment on how to build a thing. And I'm just going to show you the various pieces and highlight certain items. That section will be great for you if you're handy. Now, if you're not handy, I'm going to give you the third section. In the third section, we'll go through the build process a second time, but this time I'm going to go through it in much more detail, show you all the steps. If you watch the whole video, you'll be able to make one of these beds, and I'm sure you'll get more strawberries in the kitchen. I've been growing strawberries for a long time, so I thought I knew what I was doing. In my previous home, I went out, bought some plants, made a little bed by the basement window, put them in, watered once in a while. They were ever-bearing strawberries, and I ate strawberries all the time. Now, I did have a little problem with the birds, but they didn't eat very many of them. One thing I did learn is that when you see chew marks on your strawberries and you see a slime track, you're going to blame those snails and slugs. But that's not the problem. What actually happens is that the birds will come down and peck away. They'll make a hole, and then they'll leave. Then the snails come along and they eat the soft stuff inside. So when I moved to this property, I thought, hey, no big deal, just plant some strawberries. In fact, I brought them with me so they were the same kind. But I was so busy building the rest of the garden, I really didn't pay a lot of attention to them, and they kind of petered out. So then I got to the point where I said, okay, I want my strawberries back. This is out in the back part, right beside my vegetable bed, and it's very wild out here, so we get a lot of animals. Everything comes through here. There's a pathway right here that the deer use. To help keep the weeds out and keep the strawberries in one place, I decided to do a little raised bed. This is just 2x6 boards. I didn't want to go high. There's no point in that whatsoever. But a little bit helps. The weeds stay here, the strawberries stay here for the most part, and it's a little easier to manage. Because I'm using 8-foot boards, I made it 8 feet long, 4 feet wide. Now I can't reach all the way over, but I figured, I'll come around the backside, and that way I only have to reach in 2 feet. Should work really well. I got some good soil, put it in, planted the strawberries, and waited. Well, the plants grew all right. I didn't get a lot of berries that first year, but I didn't really expect a lot from the first year of planting. But the second year, that was going to be a good year for me. No, that's not what happened. During the winter, the deer came through here, stomped all over this bed, ate anything they could find, and by spring I had a mess here, mostly dead plants. So the second year wasn't great either, but I figured, all right, I have to do something to keep the deer out. And I came up with this construction here. This is a cover for the bed. Pretty simple to use. You just slide it on, kept the deer out beautifully. The wire mesh on here is chicken wire, and the holes are pretty small on that stuff. But guess what? Chipmunks can get through those holes. So I started having chipmunk problems in here. They'd come and eat my strawberries. I even had other problems. I bought 2 different varieties of strawberries. They were labeled as ever-bearing, but neither type grew very well in my soil, which I thought was really strange. I didn't think strawberries were that fussy. And one of the varieties wasn't ever-bearing. So what's the importance of ever-bearing? Many of the strawberry types that you can buy will make one crop. You get a lot of berries all at one time, and then it's finished for the year. Ever-bearers tend to give you a small amount of berries all summer long. And that's really the best selection for a backyard garden. Unless you want to make jam from them, then you want them all ready at once. But if you're just going to eat these, it's better to come out every week and get a handful. You don't need them all at once. And I find everbearers will make berries right up till frost. The plants didn't do very well. They weren't the right type. So what I decided to do was redo the bed. I went out, bought a new type of berry. This one works really well in my soil. And it's everbearing. It's the third week of May here, and I already have some small berries on here. And based on the last couple years, this thing will flower now till fall. The chipmunks will be very happy with that. Last year I got a new problem. Voles started going into the bed. Now I didn't think they'd go after the strawberries, but I'm pretty sure they did damage to the plants and picked berries. So now I had chipmunks and I had voles, no berries. I also have another problem now. I told you this was not a very successful garden. These boards were probably used when I put them in, and they're getting quite old, and the corners are starting to come apart because they're just rotting away. So that makes it even easier for things to come in. So it's time to change the whole bed. New boards, a different type of top, and I want to make this rodent-proof, deer-proof, everything-proof. These strawberries are for me. I'm going to redo the whole bed. So step one is to get the strawberries out of here. They're good plants. I like the variety. The berries are nice and large. So I want to keep these plants and use them in the next garden. No use throwing these out and starting over. Now strawberry plants don't have large root systems. So what I'm going to do is dig out the larger ones and put them aside. My plan here is to dig them up today, take the bed apart today, and then tomorrow morning I'll start building the new one and have it in a couple hours. Then I'll put the strawberries back. They won't even know they were moved. There's a nice clump. It's actually 3 plants in here. I'll just leave the soil on like this and store them overnight. I might give them a little spritzer of water just to cool them down, and I'll put them in the shade. Now, not all the berries will come out as nice clumps. Some will come out quite small, because these are the runners from last year, and I can still see the old runners on here. So you can snap those off with your fingers. Since it doesn't have a lot of soil on the root system, I'm going to put it in the pail here, and again, I'll spritz them later with some water, keep them nice and cool. Now it's just a matter of digging up the whole thing. I've gathered up all the strawberries and put them in the back of my little wagon. You don't want the sun shining on the roots. That will dry them out. So I've covered them with a little bit of straw. Now they're sitting in a nice, cool, shady spot till tomorrow. When you're building these kind of raised beds, always use boards that are 1.5 inch thick. So these are 2x6s. When you're joining these, this becomes the weak part. You can screw in this way, but now you've made a hole here, and the rot will start where that screw goes through. One way to overcome that is to add some sort of extra brace in the corner. In this case, I'd use some 4x4 pieces, and now I can screw in this way and this way. The screws are kept away from the corner, which is the weak point, and this kind of a joint will last longer. Now this wood in here could be anything. You know, a 2x6 or 2x4, this works too. I'm pretty sure when I made this bed, I was recycling some of my wood. And you can see this is pretty rotten in here. So this was probably old before I even used it. That's not a good idea. You want these corners really good and solid. Here's the other corner, and it shows you exactly what the problem is. Nothing's holding this board in place. You can see I used nails here, but the nail's pretty far from the end, so we don't get rot on the end of the board. And that's the benefit of doing it this way. Even better than nails is to use screws. And we're going to switch over to screws in my new project. Anyways, this is done for. The board here is still pretty good. It's quite solid. It obviously shows some rot, but it would be good for another few years. My problem is that things are crawling in underneath and coming up into the bed, and this corner is too open. They can just come in here. We got to solve those problems. You can see here the detail of the corner. This is the 4x4, and I made it longer so it would go right into the soil. That helps support the sideboards and prevents these from being pushed out when you fill it with soil. The other thing that's really interesting here is that this part here, so this was a good 8 inches underground, shows almost no rot at all. All the rot is here, which is right at the soil surface. And I think the reason is that here it gets both wet and oxygen. And that helps the microbes prosper and damage the wood. Down here it's wet, but there's less oxygen, less decay. The base of my new bed is going to be made with 2x6s, and I've got 3 of them here. 2 of these will be the long ones, and this one I'll cut into 2 pieces to make the cross piece. To keep the voles and other rodents from crawling through the soil and up into the bed, I'm going to cover the bottom with wire. And for that I've used hardware cloth that has small squares. They're 1/4 inch. And none of these rodents will be able to squeeze through 1/4 inch. I actually think 1/2 inch is probably good enough, but I wasn't going to take a chance and build all this. So I'm going with 1/4 inch. This wire mesh has a width of 3 feet, so I have to make sure that my final bed is also 3 feet wide. When I'm building something, when the bed is finished, it's going to look something like this. And on the bottom of it, we're going to put this wire mesh. I've laid out the pieces so they're in the right spot. Now it's a matter of screwing them together. Time to put the hardware cloth on the bottom piece. This is a single plant, so I can plant this the way it is. And what I plan to do is have 2 rows, one here and one here. And then I'll let the runners fill in the rest of it. It's time to build a lid. Since the lid will never touch the soil, I don't need to use pressure treated wood. So I'm just going to use construction pine. I use 2x6s for the base, but I want the lid to be a little lighter. So I'm going to use 2x4s for the lid. Watering is really easy, and you don't have to open the lid for that. The base of my new bed is going to be made with 2x6s, and I've got 3 of them here. 2 of these will be the long ones, and this one I'll cut into 2 pieces to make the cross piece. Now you might be wondering what kind of wood can you use, and a lot of people are concerned about using pressure treated wood. That was a problem more than 10 years ago when we had pressure treated wood that was treated with arsenic. And that arsenic could leach into the soil and then be absorbed by vegetables. This newer treatment, and it's been around for a number of years, is a copper-based treatment, and there's very little copper that leaves the wood. Copper is also not nearly so toxic, so pressure-treated wood today is quite safe for your vegetable gardens, and I recommend using it because it will last a long time. To keep the voles and other rodents from crawling through the soil and up into the bed, I'm going to cover the bottom with wire. And for that I've used hardware cloth that has small squares. They're 1/4 inch. And none of these rodents will be able to squeeze through 1/4 inch. I actually think 1/2 inch is probably good enough, but I wasn't going to take a chance and build all this. So I'm going with 1/4 inch. This wire mesh has a width of 3 feet, so I have to make sure that my final bed is also 3 feet wide. When I'm building something, I always look at the wood and make sure I use the best pieces for the important parts. And in this case, these are the long sections. So I check the wood over for any defects. Now, pressure treated wood is generally pretty good. Now, if you go out and buy this from one of these Home Depot places, it's usually pretty crappy wood. So find yourself a real wood dealer, a place where the landscape contractors buy from, and you'll get better wood. Now, these look pretty good. The other thing I check to see is if it has a bow in it. I want these nice and straight. And the best way to do that is just to pick it up and look down here. You'll see right away this curves a little bit that way. Same with this one. but the curve is very slight. Now this one has a few areas here that aren't quite so good, some cracks here. So I'm going to use these two for my straight pieces, cut up this one. When the bed is finished, it's going to look something like this. And on the bottom of it, we're going to put this wire mesh. I've taken this piece, make 2 cuts, and make sure these cross pieces are the right size. Measure twice, cut once. The hardware cloth is 36 inches wide. Each of these is 1.5 inch wide. So if I want to go from the outside of the beds, which is going to be 36 inches because that's how big this is, the cross piece needs to be 36 minus 1.5 inch for both sides, or 33 inches. Now I'm not going to use this whole board, so always have a look at the ends and see which part is the best. If you've got an end that's not quite great, discard that part and start cutting from the other end. To build this bed, I have to take one of the short pieces that I just cut and a long piece and join the corner. There's at least 4 different ways that you can do this. Now earlier in the video when I took the old box apart, you've seen that I had a piece of wood in here, and that's certainly a good way to do that. Gives you a lot of solid wood to screw against and gives you that post to sit in the ground so it doesn't move. The easiest method is to use nails. Get yourself some long nails, just hammer them in here. It's the easiest method, but it's also the one that probably will come apart the soonest because these nails are more likely to pull out. The other way to do it is with screws. And over the years, I've moved away from nails to using screws. They're a little more trouble, a little more work to put in, but they hold better. So you just take one of these screws. This is a 3-inch screw. It's been treated so it will rust less outside. They call them rust proof, but they're not. And you just screw it in the end here. Another way that you can do it, and this is probably the best way, it does cost a little extra money and is a little more work. Get yourself a right angle bracket and put it right in here. Then you put a couple screws in on each side, very solid corner that's never going to open up. And in fact, it's a good idea to use 2 of these, one on the top and one at the bottom. For this project, I think I'm just going to use straight screws. Now, if you have a good drill, you can put these screws directly through both boards, but it works a lot better if you pre-drill the first board. I'll give you a pilot for the screw, and the drill won't have to work nearly so hard. It also means that you'll be focused on making sure everything is square and lined up instead of pushing hard on that drill. So I like to put in pilot holes. The cross piece is going to go like this. It's 1.5 inches wide. So you can mark that if you like. Or if you've done this a lot, just eyeball that. Find the center from left to right here. Go down about 1.5 inches and drill a hole. Do the same at the bottom. And then do all 4 corners. It's getting a little later in the afternoon and it looks like we might get some rain, and the frogs have decided it's mating time. So we'll be serenaded as we continue. I've laid out the pieces so they're in the right spot. Now it's a matter of screwing them together. Now I'm working on a lawn here. You know, it's kind of bumpy, and in fact it slopes a little this way. So one way to get a smooth surface is to get an extra piece of board. For this design, it's very important that this top matches because I want the lid to sit on here really well so nothing can crawl in here. So my focus when I'm putting these together is that this height and this height are exactly the same. Now because I've got pilot holes, I can get the screws started. I know exactly where they are. Right. What a noisy place. Last night it was the frogs that were disturbing me, and this morning the birds are chirping. It's really nice to work out in the garden, isn't it? Time to put the hardware cloth on the bottom piece. First thing I did was to check it was square, and it's pretty good. The grass here will keep it in place, so it'll remain square. So now it's just a matter of lining up the hardware cloth and stapling it in place. And I'm going to use 1/4-inch staples with a staple gun. You could use specialized little nails for this too, but I think this will be just fine. It's always a good idea to put a few staples in and get it positioned where you want it. And once you're sure it's right, then put the rest of the staples in. It's a lot easier to fix it that way. Now we just cut the end off and we're done this part. Then I spent a little bit of time leveling it. Now I'm not too precise with that because I can adjust it once I have the box here. But I want to be close because it's going to be a little harder to get soil underneath the wire mesh. Now my garden here is on a slope coming this way. So I've dug down a little extra on this side to try and level it. The last garden I had was a little on the slope. Whenever I watered, the water would rush this way. So this time I'm leveling it a little more. I'll take out that excess soil later on. You might have noticed that I didn't treat this pressure treated wood in any way. A lot of people want to paint it or put shellac on it or to put tung oil on it to make it last longer. Most of those things aren't going to help. Good pressure treated wood will last at least 10 years and probably longer. Now that depends a bit on your climate, but in zone 5 where it's cool in the winter, yeah, it lasts a good 12, 15 years. Besides, who wants all those chemicals on their food anyways? All right, let's see if it fits. Yeah, this corner is a little bit low. So I'll take this off, put some soil down, and bring it back. Now normally I wouldn't walk on my garden, but in this case I don't want things to settle unevenly, so a little bit of pressure will help. All right, that's level enough. The bed's in the final resting position, and now it's time to add the soil. I'm going to use the same soil I had in this bed before. There's nothing wrong with that soil. The strawberries were growing well in it. But I'm going to add some decomposed wood chips. These are really old. I'll add those just to loosen up the soil a little bit. It's just a matter of mixing it here and throwing it there. It's almost planting time, but before you do plant, you have to think about the height of the soil. Right now, the box is filled right to the brim. And if I plant in here, of course, the plants are going to be taller. There has to be enough room between this soil level and the top of the lid to let the plants grow. Now, I'm planning to make the lid with 2x4s. So that'll give me 3.5 inches for plant growth, which is just barely enough. But remember, I've dug this twice now. I moved the soil over, then I mixed it up, I threw it back. So this is very loose. It's going to settle at least 2 inches in the next year. So if I take that 2 inches and the 3.5 inch here, I've got 5.5 inches of growing space. That's lots for strawberries. Now, if you're growing different type of crops, you might have to raise the lid up a little higher or drop the level of soil down, or use a slightly larger board here. I could have gone with 2x8, which would give me another 2 inches here. The soil level has to be adjusted for the box that you make and for the plants that you grow. All right, it's time to plant some strawberries. So I'm going to take each clump and get rid of any weeds I can see. It's easier now than later. This is a single plant, so I can plant this the way it is. And what I plan to do is have 2 rows, one here and one here. And then I'll let the runners fill in the rest of it. Now this clump here has several plants in it, and they're quite crowded, so I'm going to split it up into 2. Now you might have remembered that some of the plants were bare rooted, and I've kept those in this pail. They're very nice and moist, so these will do just fine. With a plant like this, I take off all the old runners, any old dead leaves. Don't have to do that, but I might as well clean it up while I'm here. Then simply take the plant by the root end, take your hand, wrap it around so you have all the leaves in the palm of your hand. Now they won't get in the way when you bury the roots. How far apart do you plant them? Well, it's not that critical. If you make a big fist, the fist should fit between the plants because each plant is going to get about this big. That's close enough. So now I'm just going to go and plant up the rest of the bed and I'll bring you back. I ended up having so many plants I decided to make 3 rows, and I still have lots of plants left. Next step, water it in really well. Now there's not a great rush to getting the lid done as long as you get it done before the fruit's ready. I already have strawberries on here, but they're going to need 2 or 3 weeks before they turn ripe. Keep it well watered and think about the lid you're going to make. It's time to build a lid. Since the lid will never touch the soil, I don't need to use pressure treated wood. So I'm just going to use construction pine. It'll last just as long as the base because it's kept drier and it's a little less expensive. I use 2x6s for the base, but I want the lid to be a little lighter, so I'm going to use 2x4s for the lid. So I'm going to make a box that looks exactly the same as the one I've just showed you for the base. It'll be made exactly the same way, same dimensions, same wire on top. We have the top made and it fits quite well on the box. So we're ready to put some hinges on the back. I just went out and got some 3.5-inch hinges. You can use almost anything you have around. 2 inches or larger would be better. And just put them on the back. Now I've gone in 18 inches here and we'll just put them on. So that's the top 2 screws. I'll put the third one in once I have the hinge in place. Now we'll do the bottom one. And when we do the bottom one, you want to press on here and make sure they're good and tight. We don't want anything crawling in the side. Now we'll just do the same on the other side. Creaks a little bit, but that's okay. That's going to scare off the rodents. Don't worry about the creak. I had a close look at the boxes and you can see that the front is not lining up quite right. This is the edge of the top, this is the edge of the bottom. Now they line up fine at the back, but not at the front. So what that means is that this is a little out of kilter. It's not quite square. So what I'm going to do later is get another board and just screw it in this corner. And as I do that, I'll just straighten this a bit so that it's nice and square. Might need to take a hammer and give it a whack. But once this is square and I put a board on the corner, that will hold it in place. It's good enough. Now it's pretty easy to lift this. Since I made it out of 2x4s here, it's not really heavy. But it's a little difficult grabbing it here. So I'm going to look for something I can use as a handle. That'll just make it a little easier to lift. Now the other thing I have to still solve is that once I lift this, I have to do something to keep it up here. I don't want to hold it while I'm weeding, right? I want 2 hands free. So I want this to stay up on its own. Now I could put a stick in here, that probably work okay. I think I'm going to put a string in here so it stays up on its own. The strawberries are starting to ripen, and since I put the lid on, nobody's got in here and eaten anything except me. They're good. So this is the solution I came up with. I put a little eye hook in here, another one down here, and connected them with a string. It's important to get this length just right. If it's too short, the lid won't stay up. And if it's too long, the lid falls down the other side. By using a string and a knot, it's really easy to adjust the length and get it just right. The string also acts as a handle, so it's easy to lift. When you're ready to close it, just pull on the string. And there you go. It's simple, but it really works well. Watering is really easy, and you don't have to open the lid for that.